And greetings, my friends. Welcome to the Chris Salcedo Show here on Newsmax TV. Tonight, we're going to be tackling some of the biggest threats to the United States. And when I say the United States, I mean our way of life, our rights, our freedoms, our prosperity. The first threat is the Socialist Democrat Party. A close second is the vile and inhuman communist government of China. The third threat is a group of private sector companies, media and social media, made up of people who are willing to turn their backs on our foundational principles to make a buck or curry favor with totalitarian forces they believe are inevitable in these United States. Governor Bob McDonnell and Rod Blagojevich will be along here in mere moments. Breitbart's Joe Pollak, KT McFarland, Colonel Oliver North, and Diamond and Silk are all here to confront these threats and educate you on their impact and how to fight them. But I'm going to address the first threat now. Socialist Democrats, the actual threat to our representative republic. That's where we begin in tonight's preamble. The election has raised serious and fundamental questions that Democrats and their enablers in the biased press don't want us asking. It has been stunning to watch the lack of effort or concern they have toward getting to the bottom of a lot of these so-called irregularities. The state of Texas, now being joined by 18 other states, has zeroed in on one of these issues. In a lawsuit against the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, Texas asserts that those states violated their own election rules passed by the people's representatives in those legislatures. I visited with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on the morning show. He pointed out that not every state was as lazy in preparing legal guidelines for their elections.
I think in Nevada, they actually changed the rules to be more liberal on mail-in ballots. The legislature did it, and they can do that. The problem we have is the Constitution requires that the state legislature make the rules as it affects national elections, like a presidential election, and that they follow those rules. Otherwise, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in what the founders did, otherwise you have different rules applying across different states, and there's no way to know how these elections were determined because the rules are different in potentially every county in each state.
According to the Constitution, we're going to be hearing a lot of that. Many of you folks in the various states may be asking yourselves, why is Texas doing this? You people in Pennsylvania, for example, some of you may be saying, hey, we elected Wolf and other corrupt Democrats to screw us on Election Day. What business does Texas have by butting into our corrupt government and election? Well, the simple answer is the corruption of your elected leaders there in Pennsylvania. Governor Wolf and your crooked Supreme Court, they violated the United States Constitution by violating the election laws passed by your representatives in the legislature. The Constitution, which overrides your derelict governor and your corrupt Supreme Court, states that elections in the various states are governed by laws passed by the legislatures. Paxton says there are other institutions that are impacted when states decide not to follow their own laws.
Well, it also affects Senate elections. I mean, think about if Georgia doesn't do that right, that affects our U.S. senators because if the Senate flips, then suddenly our senators are in really different positions because Georgia didn't run their elections pursuant to state law and pursuant to the federal Constitution. So that has an impact on every one of my voters in Texas. And so that's why we care about this.
Many of you may be hearing that the Supreme Court must take this case. Others may be hearing the Supreme Court can choose not to take this case. Here's what Paxton thinks.
When you file state on state, you have to file in the U.S. Supreme Court. Unlike other cases where you start at the district court, I believe that the jurisprudence, the right answer is they have to hear our case. But they have a history of saying, no, we can hear any case we want, so we don't have to hear your case. The problem with that is if my citizens have a problem, if they have a harm, we only have one place to take it if it's a state-on-state case. And so if they don't hear our case, then that harm can never be heard or addressed. So they're going to say they have a choice. They can take it or not take it for any reason that they want, good or bad.
All right. Now, there is only one court, you heard him, that can settle disputes among the various states. It's the Supreme Court. In my opinion, if the Supreme Court doesn't hear this case and provide injunctive relief while we sort this whole thing out, the Constitution, our mutual handshake, becomes meaningless, as does the Supreme Court itself. The Constitution is the foundation of our society and our way of life. It is how we have agreed that we will relate to one another. We never agreed to suspend our Constitution based on a pandemic or the political needs of one party or faction. Recently, it was revealed that our own FBI, upon hearing of communist Chinese espionage with Democrats like Eric Swalwell and Dianne Feinstein, they gave both of those socialist lawmakers what they called defensive briefings. When the same leadership in the FBI found out that Russia was trying to influence President Trump's team during the election, FBI leadership didn't tell candidate Trump or his team. They decided to use the revelation as an excuse to undermine the campaign representing the Republican Party. There needs to be a reckoning for that, by the way. The question is, will the Supreme Court do what the FBI did? Will it ignore the law and undertake the same rank partisanship, and in so doing, betray their obligation to our founding document and our people? Texas AG Ken Paxton hopes the Supreme Court follows the Constitution.
This is a historic moment. I don't know that we've ever had a case like this that had so much sort of impetus for the future and what kind of country we're going to be. If we make the wrong choices now, it will affect elections for the rest of our lives, and we may not be able to trust those elections, and that fundamentally changes what the founders put in place.
All right, folks, what kind of country do you want to leave to your children and grandchildren? Do you want what we conservatives want, a nation that is free, prosperous, and has a guiding principle of equal justice under the law? Or do you want the socialist Democrats, what they want? A banana republic based on poverty for the masses, riches for the elites, and where public policy and our courts are governed by Beijing? Answer that question for yourself. Let's expand on our top story. Tonight, we are joined, at least scheduled to be joined, by two former governors, Virginia Republican Bob McDonnell, a Newsmax contributor, and we're also trying to connect with Rod Blagojevich, former Democrat governor of Illinois. Want to welcome Governor McDonnell first. Sir, your reaction to the Texas election lawsuit, what do you think?
It's very novel. There's never been a suit that I know of, that the commentators have said, that's been filed like this, where one state, Texas, now joined in amicus briefs by 17 other states, has said that the constitutional rights under the U.S. Constitution of the people of Texas has been abridged because of actions taken in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and a few other states, where these allegations of fraud actually tip the balance of power in favor of those states. In other words, the people of Texas who voted for Donald Trump and therefore get the votes in the Electoral College are being deprived of their voice, if you will, because people in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin didn't follow the law. I mean, we've heard some of the cases over many years of what's happened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with unfortunately a history of corruption. But they've alleged some new things, Chris, this year, which is one, because of the mail-in voting and not systematically following those rules, that there's been a rife opportunity for fraud. And that secondly, because of that, it worked to the distinct advantage of one political party. It's a novel suit. It does trigger the original jurisdiction of the U.S. Supreme Court. And now they've got a really big decision to make under really sort of a novel claim. Are they going to take this up?
Right. Let's drill down this. Governor Blagojevich joining us right now. And Governor, I want you to tackle this for us, because it's not so much the fraud that Texas is focusing in on. They're focusing on the fact that it is beyond a doubt that these states went against their legislature, what the elected representatives in the various states passed as law. And under the Constitution, they're not allowed to do that. Whether you have a pandemic or whatever emergency you happen to have, you just can't willy-nilly change election laws without going through the people's representatives. What do you think about the merits of the case, Governor Blagojevich?
Yes, well, I've learned a lot about the Constitution over the last several weeks as I've been following this, and it's the Electors Clause in the Constitution. I believe it's Article 1, Section 2, and it gives to the state legislatures the authority to make the rules in their states to conduct elections, not governors, not election board commissioners, and not courts. So it seems to me that the only court that's in the appropriate place to decide this conflict would be the United States Supreme Court. So I very much support this lawsuit. 17, 18 attorneys generals from nearly half the states in America have joined in as friends of the court to make the case on behalf of the constituents in their states. The fact is, it's a very simple question, really. Every legal vote is canceled out by every illegal vote. And all of us Americans, Republicans and Democrats, socialists and Green Party people, libertarians, we all have an interest in free, fair, and honest elections. And so I feel like this is very important. Everything should be tried, because I have no doubt in my mind, as a Democrat from Chicago, a governor from Illinois, who came out of Chicago politics at the same time as President Obama, we both know how Democratic big city machines operate. We both know this was a stolen election. So I think this is good, and keep trying, keep pushing, because we're on the side, or they're on the side, the Trump campaign is on the side of what is right.
Yeah, I want you guys both to go back to when you both were in the governor's mansions and answer this question. And Governor McDonald, we'll start with you. If you tried to pull what Wolf tried to pull in Pennsylvania, if you said to your legislature, I don't care what the hell you guys passed, I've got an emergency, whether it was a pandemic or whatever, I'm going to make my own rules for an election, what response, Governor McDonald, would you have received?
Not good. I mean, you know, the one thing everybody agrees in both parties to do is when you get sworn in and you put up your hand is to follow the Constitution, follow the statutes, and faithfully discharge them. So I know we've had that battle in Virginia. Is the old saying of Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, that doesn't mean because of a pandemic that you can abridge the rules, if the executive doesn't have the power to do that. If you exceed your power and change the rules, that's not legal. If the Pennsylvania Supreme Court upholds certain changes to the balloting procedure that's not prescribed by the legislature, that's wrong. And so I do think that it's novel, but it's also not without merit, along with some of the claims, Chris, they did make about fraud. You know, this is with 43 states having absentee ballots, some of them, 9 states, not even requiring you to request the ballot, but automatically mailed. That also creates some problems. So I think it's one that's novel, and the Supreme Court really should take it up and make that fundamental decision about whether or not a systematic change by courts and executive branch people of the legislature's rules that governs federal elections, whether that impairs the ability to have a fair count in those states.
Yeah, Governor Blagojevich, what if you had decided when you were governor, like they did that in Georgia, you know what, signature verification, yeah, I know what the law says, but you know what, it's a pandemic. Let's just skip that part. We'll just skip the signature verification. What kind of pushback, sir, would you have gotten?
Well, here again, and I would add to what the governor just said, we have a responsibility as governors to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law, to follow rules. So if you go outside the bounds of the Constitution, then you should expect, and it's perfectly appropriate for others to not only criticize, but to demand some kind of remedy for that. The legislature would have been up in arms. The media would have been up in arms. However, I will say this, because of the double standard that exists today in the corporate media, it really depends on whether you were doing that to help, let's say, the Democrat candidate for president or President Trump. If it was an act that would help President Trump, there would be a big hue and cry. They'd probably throw you out of office. If it was an effort to help Joe Biden, it's obvious, they'd probably applaud you.
Governors, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys coming on, helping us break this down. Appreciate the time, as always, on the Chris Salcedo Show. This just in, all 4 defendant states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, they have filed their responses/dissents with the High Court. Pennsylvania's Attorney General Josh Shapiro called Texas's lawsuit a, quote, seditious abuse of the judicial process. But here's the funny thing. 70 members of Pennsylvania's own General Assembly have filed an amicus brief or a motion supporting the Texas lawsuit, in essence suing their own state government, supporting the lawsuit against their own state government. Meanwhile, 106 House Republicans representing 22 states filed a similar amicus brief supporting the Texas lawsuit, including Congressman Michael Burgess and Louis Gohmert. Meanwhile, 23 other states have filed a brief opposing the Texas suit. Up next, China is proving itself to be America's biggest threat internationally. We'll discuss that with Colonel Oliver North and KT McFarland next on Newsmax TV.
For a long time, Republicans, Democrats, leaders all across academia, institutions, commercial space thought that by trading and engaging with China, that the Chinese Communist Party would reform itself, it would loosen up, it would embrace economic and political freedom, and it would present less risk to freedom around the world.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo laying out quite clearly why the Chinese Communist government cannot and must not ever be trusted. But socialist Democrats are not fazed. Some remain supportive of policies that favor Communist China. They have sold out America's interests, and instead, socialist Democrats are all in for Communist China, and no one, other than us here on Newsmax, willing to call them out for it. No one wants to report on Hunter Biden's business ties to China, or how those ties have influenced his father's policies in the Obama administration and in the United States Senate. The biased press refuses to talk about Congressman Eric Swalwell's relationship with a suspected Chinese spy. So the media is either clueless or complicit. Joining me now to discuss is retired Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. He is a historian and author of the book America's #1 Adversary and What We Must Do About It. Sir, welcome. Secretary of State Pompeo there also warned that the Chinese Communist Party wants what we have, and they're going to do whatever it takes to get it. DNI Ratcliffe has also warned that China is engaged in a massive influence campaign targeting several members of Congress and their staffs in an effort to get them to do the bidding of the Chinese Communist government, and Democrats refuse to condemn China for their role in intentionally spreading a deadly disease that has killed their own constituents. Colonel, if China is a threat from abroad, are socialist Democrats the threat from within?
Yes, and it's not new. Let me just take you back a few years, Chris, to when I was working at the White House. I was in the National Security Council staff. We knew of a U.S. congressman who was meeting regularly with members of an organization called the Sandinista Communist Government in Nicaragua. Okay? That issue came up in a very small group meeting that I chaired, and the recommendation was made, don't tell the congressman what we know about what he's doing. Instead, let's see if we can double the person he's talking to from the Sandinista side. And so what was eventually done, without because I have no idea how classified all this is at this point in my life, but what I ended up doing with the direction of Director Casey and my boss in the National Security Council and the Attorney General of the United States is I met with the opposition leader that was being romanced by and was romancing the congressman from California. And I bought him off. For $10,000 a month, we made him our ally instead of the Sandinistas' allies. That easily could have been done in this case had they carried this thing out the way it used to be done. I'm not saying that they need an Ollie North, but what they need is a policy that says we're going to flip the person on the other side, the adversary, the enemy. In this case, in modern times, we're looking at a communist Chinese special agent of their intelligence service who is not only romancing a U.S. congressman, she's been all over the place in mattresses all over the country. And use that agent. No, pull him aside and say, here's what we know about Johnny. Here's the deal. You start working for us and tell us who your bosses are and the kinds of things that they're doing to buy influence. So what the communist Chinese are doing and what Secretary Pompeo mentioned and what the DNI has mentioned is they're using all the elements of power, military power, intelligence, and the kinds of soft power. And I'll give you an example of the soft power they're using. This week, okay, the pandas here in Washington, D.C. were supposed to be sent back. Oh, lo and behold, we're going to allow them to stay for another, I think it's another year. And of course, we'll pay their rent, that kind of thing. That generated, from the last time you and I talked about this thing, that generated what? North, how come you're picking on the communist Chinese? They just let us keep the pandas, for crying out loud. In other words, a perfect example of the soft power that they're using against us. Not just the influence in Congress, but the influence they bought from major American corporations that do more business in China. They have more customers in China. And you and I have watched what's happened with the NBA. All those kinds of things are being used to wield their power because their goal is domination of the world, not just us, but the rest of the world. And all the other 70 items that are in this book by my buddies from the NSC days, okay? All those items are right here in this book. And we ought to be employing all 70 recommendations from Admiral John Poindexter, Bud McFarlane, and Richard Levine in this book to show us what we ought to continue to do to push back. You don't need, Look at these are the guys who helped Ronald Reagan end the Cold War. Ronald Reagan used to call the Soviet Union the evil empire.
Fantastic, fantastic resources there. You know, and a couple of things that you brought to mind as I was listening to you talk there. Number one, we all remember a guy by the name of Senator Ted Kennedy, who conspired with the Soviets to undermine Ronald Reagan. We have documentation that proves that. And also about this honeypot that was romancing, as you so eloquently put it, a Democrat socialist congressman, Eric Swalwell. How is it that our FBI allowed Mr. Swalwell to cut off the relationship with her and then have her skip the country? She got out. How is it that our FBI allowed that to happen rather than getting her into custody and then letting Mr. Swalwell know he was compromised? And for that matter, what about the person that was driving around Dianne Feinstein for the last 2 decades? Why were they allowed?
Well, in large part because Donald Trump was right. There is a swamp. Washington, D.C. is full of swamp monsters, many of whom stand to gain by improving the relationship with Communist China. The ideas that the Communist Chinese have sound so appealing if you're a, quote, progressive in this culture today. The idea is that business in China is more important than looking after America's interests and American workers, for crying out loud. I mean, one of the things that drove the left nuts in this country is what Donald Trump did is he created, and I put it my way, the dignity of work. Okay? Millions of Americans found jobs because of what Donald Trump did to protect their jobs in this country. He stood up to the big opponents in the unions. He stood up to the big opponents up on Capitol Hill. And millions of people found the dignity of work. And of course, all of that collapses with COVID-19. Interesting about the timing on COVID-19. I mean, we do know from, again, the authors of this book that the Communist Chinese were instrumental, if nothing else, in limiting the amount of information about how dangerous this exposure to this virus really is. And it all comes out in time to ruin that job market. I mean, the United States has been hurt not just more by deaths, it's been hurt more by people being out of work, the enormous percentage of Americans who no longer have a job. All that kind of thing came about as a consequence.
I've only got about a minute and a half here, and I want to get an answer to this question because I think it's important. Communist China is a threat. It is the biggest threat that our country faces. How do we, as the United States of America, face that threat when we have one Democrat arm tied behind our back? We have an entire political party dedicated to making sure that we can't fight China. How do we do that?
Well, I'll tell you how we the people need to do it. We the people had darn well better turnout for the special election for 2 senators running in Georgia. They have got to turn out if this country offers any opportunity to the future of my 18 grandchildren. I'm hopeful that we turn this thing around and the Senate stays in the hands of the Republicans so this whole thing isn't going to get pushed through a totally complicit Congress, because that's what it will be. And my hope and my prayer is, you want to know how you turn it around? We turn out the vote on the Republican side in both these Senate races. God help us if we don't.
Colonel, thank you very much. Colonel, thank you very much for the service. Merry Christmas to you, sir, and we'll talk again soon. Folks, we had some problems hooking up with KT McFarland. Her internet, it wasn't on par, so we'll have to catch up with her at a different time. Still ahead on the Chris Salcedo Show, there's just one way the country can be saved from socialism. We'll talk about that next on Newsmax TV.
This is a historic moment. I don't know that we've ever had a case like this that had so much sort of impetus for the future and what kind of country we're going to be. If we make the wrong choices now, it will affect elections for the rest of our lives, and we may not be able to trust those elections, and that fundamentally changes what the founders put in place.
No truer words. Glad you made it back, everybody. That was Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton with me on the morning show. America at a crossroads. Will the nation's high court help steer the country on the right path, or will we take that hard left turn towards socialism? Joining me now to discuss this, Joel Pollack. He's the senior editor at large for Breitbart News, also an attorney. His latest book is titled neither free nor fair, the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Sir, it's great to have you here. As an attorney, what is your take on the Texas lawsuit?
Well, this is the most interesting lawsuit I think that's been brought thus far because it goes right to the heart of the constitutional issues. This election, if you just pull back the lens a little bit and look beyond the controversies over voting machines or election observers, this election, I argue, was unfree and unfair, largely because the rules changed in the middle. And we went to a mass vote by mail system at the urging of one party, the Democrats, and over the objections of the other party, the Republicans. Often these changes were made outside the state legislature. Look at Georgia, for example. They did pass a new law in 2019, loosening some of the rules on signatures for absentee ballots, for example. But then Democrat pressure groups came back in 2020 and they extracted this consent decree from the state's Republican governor. And they produced this new set of rules that the people of Georgia never really had a chance to weigh in on at all. So they went right around the electorate to rewrite the rules in an even more permissive fashion. And this is unacceptable. I mean, it's basically a violation of the basic standards of a free and fair election, but it also goes against our Constitution.
Absolutely. And of course, that's how the other side rolls. Socialist Democrats, they don't give a damn about what the people think, just what's politically convenient for them. I want to take a closer look at the media and big tech. I'm going to put this up on the screen. This was from a couple of weeks ago from the Media Research Center. 17% of Biden voters in swing states would not have cast their vote for Mr. Biden if they had known about the Tara Reade scandal or the Hunter Biden scandals. That's an amazing amount of folks. So that says to me that this effort to suppress the truth by the majority of the press actually worked.
It did work. And I think it also worked for another reason, which is not that Biden supporters might have had second thoughts if they knew. I mean, I think at that point in the election, frankly, in mid-October, if you were voting for Joe Biden, you were going to do so no matter what. The guy was not a very good candidate. He spent the entire general election in his basement. He seemed to forget basic things about his own policies. And we had explored some of these Hunter Biden issues for months. Now, you didn't see it in the mainstream media, but if you watch Newsmax or you followed Breitbart, you knew about it. And I think that there are reasons to believe a lot of the Biden voters were simply voting against Trump. The other thing is that vote by mail started so early, even early September in some states. So the revelations about Hunter Biden came fairly late. But the reason it's important is this. We need to make sure that our media is operating in a fair manner, that there's a sort of fairness in access, not a fairness doctrine, but just a general principle that both sides deserve to be heard. And we didn't see that in this election. Plus, the social media companies, the big tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, they censored the Hunter Biden news. They punished people who circulated it. They suspended people who even posted a link to the story, even if they didn't agree with it. There were journalists who were criticizing it who, out of habit, just linked to the story anyway, and they lost access to their own Twitter accounts. The New York Post got shut down for more than 2 weeks because they published a story that we now know was 100% true. The new revelation about Hunter Biden being under investigation has everything to do with that laptop and the people he was dealing with China business companies and whatever, the joint venture he had with CEFC, China Energy Company. That is all documented on the laptop. So we have lost faith in our institutions in this country because they have taken a side. They've stopped playing the role as foundations of democracy, and they've decided to join the left. That's very, very dangerous. No matter what the outcome of this election is, I think that's something we really have to fix urgently for the future.
Yeah, it took me kind of where I wanted to go on that because as has been proven by these social media giants, they're not to be trusted. They have an agenda. They are publishers. They are not forums. YouTube just coming out saying, "Oh yeah, you can't question the election anymore." They are absolutely anti-free speech. How much of this did you deal with in your book?
Well, I do talk about YouTube in the book. Of course, this came out a few days after my book came out, but I talk about YouTube deplatforming people. You know, it starts off with the most controversial people like Alex Jones, getting kicked off of YouTube, getting kicked off of Twitter. But it goes from there. This idea that they can deplatform views that they don't like. And again, Facebook stopped the circulation of the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop, but it was true. It was a true story. So this is a form of interfering in our democracy. It's not responsible corporate citizenship. It's not facilitating public debate in a responsible and safe way. It's not preventing civil unrest. It's just sowing distrust. You know, we still have Democrats who believe that Donald Trump is not a legitimate president. They believe in Russia collusion. In fact, something like 4 out of 5 Democrats still believed the Russia collusion story in 2020 after it had already been debunked. Now, that's wrong, but
good grief.
That's up to them. Nobody said that they had to be deplatformed. If we were going to deplatform people for the Russia collusion story, there'd be no media left.
That's for sure. Joe Pollak, Merry Christmas, sir. It's always great to talk with you. Come back soon. Coming up, folks, Diamond and Silk, they weigh in on the election, the vaccine, so much more. It's all coming up on Newsmax TV. Don't go anywhere. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Joined now by the lovely ladies, Diamond and Silk. You can watch their program, Diamond and Silk, Crystal Clear, Saturday, 6:30 Eastern, right here on Newsmax TV. It is always wonderful seeing you, ladies, and I've been eager since the Texas AG filed his lawsuit, joined by 17, 18 other states now. What is your impression of this lawsuit? What do you think?
Wow, I really hope that the Supreme Court do take this case up.
Yeah.
Listen, we're dependent on the Supreme Court, and here's why. Because we are a constitutional republic, we want to remain that. We want to remain a republic. We do not want to turn into a communist, socialist country. We don't want to turn into a banana republic. So it's imperative that they take this up to make sure was constitutional laws followed. And if constitutional laws were not followed, call them out and deem stuff null and void, or do whatever you have to do to correct the left or whoever did all of this here, to correct their wrong.
And I also want to thank my fellow Republicans for standing up for what's right.
Right.
Absolutely. And I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I'm just sick and tired of, typically, it's Democrats who say, oh, well, this law is inconvenient, so I'm just going to ignore it, and then you can sue me later. I'm tired of that.
I'm tired of it too.
Yeah.
But it's not only Democrats, Chris. It's also Republicans too.
Yeah.
You know, anytime you have Stacey Abrams go behind the backs of the legislator and get with the Secretary of State who happen to be a Republican and they do a side deal, that's wrong. It's time to start calling out this here. Start looking into the system, calling out this fraud, and clean this up, and give this election to the rightful winner. And to us, that's Donald J. Trump.
That's right.
Fair point. Fair point on that. I want to shift some gears on you. At Cornell University in New York, they came up with a policy on vaccines. They said, okay, people who are white, you must get the flu vaccine. But you people of color, you don't have to get the flu vaccine. This policy is racist on so many levels. I mean, it just coming and going. What is your impression of this?
Well, you know, they invoke race into anything. You can be eating jelly beans. If you don't eat too many black ones or you eat too many black ones, that must mean you're racist. But here's the deal. Here's the deal, Chris. This is what I think. I think that I don't think any vaccine should be mandated. I think that you should pick and choose what vaccine you want to pick and choose.
That's right.
I think that black people, white people, all people should do what's best for them.
That's right.
That's what I truly think. I don't think we should politicize or invoke race in vaccinations. I really don't think that. Even when it came to this pandemic and when you saw the top doctors invoking race by saying black people was the ones that was disproportionately affected by COVID-19, I didn't like that. I don't think things should be mandatory. I think it should be choice where people can pick and choose what they want.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, you guys have a show coming up this weekend. What are you going to be focused on?
Oh, we're talking about the 2020 vision when it comes to this election. We're talking about these social media tech giants and the censorship that they're doing. And we're also talking about people that's taking a stand when it comes to the ban. So make sure you all tune in this Saturday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Diamond and Silk Crystal Clear.
Can't wait. And you know what? The social media giants went after you guys. I never forgave them for that. That's when I really started turning on those folks. Hey, until we see you guys next week, from me to you, mwah.
Mwah.
See you later, ladies. Coming up, more California China virus controversy. A judge says that the little tyrant mayors have gone too far. That's next on Newsmax TV. All right, welcome back, everybody. We discussed yesterday how Hunter Biden is under a tax investigation. Well, another member of the Biden family is under investigation, too. Biden's younger brother, James, is reportedly under federal investigation by the United States Attorney in Pennsylvania for his role in a now bankrupt healthcare firm. James Biden worked with AmeriCorps Health, a company that operated rural hospitals. He received a personal loan of $650,000 from the company before decreasing his day-to-day activities. Gee, another Biden is corrupt. Stop the presses. Now let's get to some real breaking news, shall we? U.S. Government Advisory Panel has just endorsed Pfizer's China virus vaccine in a major step in Operation Warp Speed. Reports indicate the Trump vaccine will be distributed within the next 24 to 48 hours. A win for small businesses in Los Angeles. A judge has ruled that in L.A. County, somebody in L.A. County cannot ban outdoor dining. Oh, I'm sorry. Officials in L.A. County can't ban outdoor dining. The judge says officials acted arbitrarily in the presumptive ban without providing any evidence of the dangers they claim it causes. Restaurants are able to resume outdoor dining once the stay-at-home orders are lifted, so now it's up to their left-wing extremist governor, Newsom. Speaking of Newsom, 8 companies partially owned by the governor reportedly received millions from the Paycheck Protection Program. Data released from the Small Business Administration shows substantial PPP loans made to plump-jack businesses during the pandemic. In 2018, Newsom joined ownership in that company, which owns wineries, bars, and restaurants. Plump-jack allegedly received more than 7 times the average amount of other small business loans. News out of Seattle, a bomb scare at the headquarters of the Spokane County Democrat Party. A man wearing a backpack walked into the building claiming he had a bomb. By the time police got there, he had started a small fire in the building. Witnesses said the backpack he was carrying did have some wires coming out of it, but the bomb squad later determined there was no explosive device in that bag. The man quickly surrendered minutes after police arrived, so nobody was hurt. Sticking with Seattle, the city council is saying they will be okay with certain crimes being committed so long as they're committed by people living in poverty. The idea, referred to as poverty defense, would provide an affirmative defense for anyone who commits a crime because they need to meet a certain basic need to survive. Certain instances could include vandalism, trespassing, shoplifting, and other misdemeanor crimes. Okay. Move to a Democrat city, commit crimes. Coming up, a woke Grinch is trying to cancel Christmas in a small Minnesota neighborhood. We'll explain what that's all about coming up next on the Chris Salcedo Show. Plus, do you think President Trump should concede to Joe Biden? Yes or no? Text that answer to 39747. That's when we get back. Chris Salcedo Show on Newsmax TV. And welcome back, everybody. Make sure you keep it right here on Newsmax TV. Spicer and Company on the way next. Sean and Lindsay will be speaking with the president of Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton, and don't miss that. He's always a fountain of knowledge. This next story, I want you all, wherever you are, stop what you're doing and pay attention to this story. Our government is too big to be managed by the 525 people we send up to Capitol Hill. Take a look at this graphic from the nonprofit organization OpenTheBooks.com. Since 2004, 20 of the country's largest federal agencies have admitted to dispersing close to $2.3 trillion with a T, my friends, trillion dollars in improper payments. This means payments were made by the U.S. government, your taxpayer dollars, to the wrong person for the wrong amount or for the wrong reason. Last year alone, these improper payments totaled $175 billion, equal to a full year's salary for the entirety of the federal government. Now, one last thing. Woke left is now trying to cancel Christmas. Multiple families in Minnesota have received a letter from an anonymous neighbor saying they don't like their decor. It's systemic bias, they say. The complaint claims their Christmas lights create a harmful impact on those who don't celebrate the holiday. Grinch. That's it for the Chris Salcedo Show, folks. I hope you folks can tune in tomorrow morning, 8 to 9 Eastern. That's when we take your phone calls and get your opinion on the news of the day. We're back here tomorrow evening, kicking off prime time here on Newsmax TV, 5 o'clock. All the day's news. Then, Spicer and Company come your way next. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow for a Friday on Newsmax TV.